So just a quick question. So I have a presentation. I can do the presentation, or we can have a discussion. I just wasn't clear which you would prefer, or should I just do what I do?
Do what you do.
I'll do me. I'll do. Okay. So I want to talk to you about effectively this practice or this approach to thinking about the future that myself and some of my colleagues at the Near Future Laboratory and others call design fiction. And we look at it as a way to effectively think about the very tangible implications of the ideas that I'm sure are in a lot of our heads about possible futures or new ideas that we have or ideas for innovation, and trying to represent those in a way that, from my point of view and my perspective, and I think other people share this, makes it feel a little bit more real than, as we were talking during the lunch session, more real than like an abstract that might go into a research proposal. And I have to believe and I have to feel that very many of us are creative, bright, sort of motivated by the possibility of making a brighter, better, more habitable future world, that we don't think in abstractions. We think in the implications that our ideas ultimately are going to have in everyday life. And my trajectory professionally as an engineer and as a researcher and as a designer and as an academic I just sort of come to realize that I prefer to work in tangible realities, and combining my my own background in electrical engineering and computer science, where it's like I like to solder stuff and I like to look under the microscope as I'm doing like SMD placement. I'm much more interested in the nitty-gritty of the everyday and actually making the things that might exist in worlds than I am in just doing an abstract for an NSF proposal, which is probably why I didn't succeed as an academic. So the subtitles, effectively gets down to it's like, how do we imagine the future? What are the ways in which we imagine the future? And it's a genuine question, so I've got some answers to it, but understanding that we translate these ideas that come to us, and they might come to us as walking down the street, it might come to us in a dream, it might come to us as after we see like a really good science fiction film, and we're like, hey, wouldn't that be cool if? We try to represent those abstract kind of things in our imagination, we articulate them in some kind of way. So we might answer that question like, wouldn't it be cool if ... And then we answer the if, and we tell a story to our friends, and it's like we say things like, we get almost breathless, like, but suppose it was able to connect this way, and then when you're going over there, it did some other kind of thing. And we begin to represent them not just in abstractions as sort of vague expressions of a generalized idea, but as the things that we would experience. And for me, sort of framing the question to say, great idea, what does that look like when I get up in the morning? How does that change, what is the experience of having that idea when I've lost one shoe in the morning? What does this mean for my commute from home to work? How is it going to affect that? And it actually makes your work a bit thicker. It makes it a little bit more tangible than the abstraction. And it's almost like, stop working in abstractions, just start answering the everyday question. Tell the story and add some drama to it. So this is it. So we tell stories. We tell stories, and we also do a lot of work. A lot of these ideas get represented in film. And if anyone here, let me see, show of hands, who is not a fan of film? Who is not a fan of film with some good drama in it? Who is not a fan of good science fiction film? Oh, yeah, okay, it's all right. What I've come to learn is that film in particular is a very effective way of telling a story. And we know this from some of the great cinematographers and storytellers and film directors. So I'm a huge fan of Steven Spielberg, and I've learned a lot, not from him personally, but I've learned a lot in the way in which he tells films. And one of the sort of groundbreaking films, at least in terms of my sort of like professional understanding of this, was Jurassic Park. Does everyone remember the film Jurassic Park? So a world in which dinosaurs exist. So amazing visual story, told effectively by Steven Spielberg, based on Michael Crichton's book of the same name, about a world in which dinosaurs exist. It's complete bullshit. Like, dinosaurs do not exist. They might have existed, but they don't exist now. I'm almost positive of that. But nevertheless, I shelled out $11 to go see a world in which they do exist. And if you remember the film, the syntax and the visual structure of the film was absolutely brilliant. And they knew what they were doing. So they know that an audience is going to come and it's like, well, okay, we'll see some dinosaurs run around. I get it, it's kind of cool, but pretty sure that they don't exist. But the first beats of the film are them effectively telling us and showing us how they could exist. And they do it with science. So if you remember the beginning of the film, they effectively show us like that sort of high school style science film. It's almost like it's playing on a 16 millimeter projector, which they used to exist. I know because I was the guy who pushed the cart around to the room in high school with them. And they showed like in a wonderful animated way how dinosaur DNA can be reanimated when it's frozen in amber. And they sort of take us through almost like just guiding us by the hand as you would if you're telling the story to a child about how they could exist. But they're telling it to us. It's not for the sake of advancing the story as much as helping us as an audience come to suspend disbelief about the existence of dinosaurs, at least so we get $11 worth of entertainment experience. And understanding that powerful way in which a story can be told to help someone suspend their disbelief, if only for the purposes of enjoying a dramatic film, to me it just changed my view about what it is to do and tell stories about the future. So you do it in such a way that you can guide someone through it and say, like, this is what the world would look like. Now, we know it's just fiction, but for this moment, we're going to allow you to enjoy that. And so finding the way in which you can sort of apply that same approach to storytelling, particularly with like little films, for me became a very important aspect of this design fiction work. And this came through an academic friend, colleague, guy called David Kirby, professor at University of Birmingham, where he was looking at effectively almost giving a number of examples in which this particular approach to telling a story is used. But then he went one step further. He said, not only is it used, he's saying it's being used for purposes beyond just that moment of 2 hours of enjoyment. So he gives an example of a film called Destination Moon. And in Destination Moon, the producers of the film basically commissioned it because they wanted to tell a story about man going to the moon. And it was still at a time where that was like very high speculation, but they were actual investors. So they wanted to fund an industry that would actually build up around this idea of trying to get to the moon. So how did they do it? Did they do it as a documentary? Did they do it as a kind of corporate video to say, this is how we'll do it? They did it as drama. So they did it as a, if you can find it on YouTube. It's a bit, it's quirky and a little bit hokey, you might say. The special effects aren't that great. So to get it to look like the guys that they're in zero gravity, obviously they just tilted the camera to the side and they had the guy walk kind of in a clunky way across this floor in order to get out of the spacecraft. So a spacecraft is one of those cigar-shaped things that lands on a tripod, which is a bit impractical to get out. They lower a ladder down, so little hokey things like that. But they went through the purpose of actually showing the steps that you would have to do, and they show some of the implications of like space travel. Again, in a kind of corny way, so they're bored because it takes a long time to get from the Earth to the moon. And so they sit around like a prison chain gang. One guy's playing harmonica to pass the time, and they're passing around cheese sandwiches because people, astronauts got to eat in outer space. But they answer the questions that a large public audience would have, like, what would it be like to travel to the moon? They don't just go there. They show, like almost in a laborious way, like all the things that they would need to do, almost as a guidebook. So they're saying, these are the questions we're going to have to answer. These are the sort of challenges that industry is going to have in order to be able to get there. And so for me, that became like a way, what David calls the diegetic prototype. So diegetic is from the Greek diegesis, meaning sort of narrative and story. And the prototype is the thing that you build. It's the representation of something that is possible, but almost done in material form. And David would point at all these different aspects of these films like Destination Moon and Jurassic Park and 2001: A Space Odyssey and say, these are prototypes of possibility. And what happens when you do that really well is that you begin to communicate to a large-scale public audience the possibility of this idea. So it's clever marketing, effectively. It's a clever way of enrolling people into your vision of a possible world. And it's something that, initially, as a very pragmatic, I'm less pragmatic now, as a pragmatic kind of instrumentally minded engineering kind of guy, I'd be like, that's just marketing. It doesn't really help me with my problem. It doesn't help me translate my idea into to other people's experience. But I've come to learn that it actually does. if you can tell a story that helps people understand the idea that's in your head that maybe you're having a little trouble describing or expressing with words, maybe you're having a little trouble getting people to see, frustration, getting people to see what's in your imagination, turning it around and telling a story, especially a visual one, can be a very powerful way of doing it. One of David's conclusions through this, well, it was a paper, but then it became a book called Lab Coats in Hollywood, where he does a whole bunch of different examples of this, is that that it may be much more powerful than just writing a research report. And I've come to realize that because research reports really don't get read. So this is what design fiction is: the sort of use of diegetic prototypes to suspend disbelief about the future. So telling stories with objects that somehow represent your idea in order to get people to sort of say like, huh, okay, I see what you're talking about. I can see that world. And for us, I think it's almost crucial to make that representation what we sort of call the normal, ordinary, everyday. So not the big macro scale stuff, not a world in which, but more like, again, like I'm saying, what is it like to, how do I get my dog to come back when it's run and chasing a squirrel? Like the experiences that we know everyone has. What do I do, Michael said we were musing about these possible examples, what do I do when a self-driving car has blocked my driveway? Or I left a bag of groceries in the self-driving car and it's gone off to pick someone else up. Or I left my kid in the self-driving car because I was kind of distracted by something else. These are things that we know will happen, and it's almost like rather than doing it, rather than looking at the edge cases, not so much to say like we've identified the edge cases, but doing it because it makes you travel back to the core problem, and it actually expands the problem set, and it helps define the problem set in a more robust way. And I'll give you some examples. So at the Near Future Laboratory, we're working on what we're calling the manual. It probably won't be called that, but we call it something like that, where we effectively go through what design fiction is, historically, where it came from, sort of people who are sort of working in and around it, and then probably most effectively as a manual is to describe what we call design fiction archetypes. So these are frameworks around which design fictions can inhabit and sort of come to life. It's not a exclusive list. It's meant to be sort of like almost motivating sort of other possible ideas, but some of the ones that we enjoy. So films, obviously we love telling stories through images. Repair manuals, because things in every world need to be repaired. So if you have an idea like what is it, and you have to do these things. So I worked at Nokia and at my own company now where we're making products, and yet those products need a way in which the larger system outside of like the wonderful way in which all your consumers are going to enjoy it, someone's going to say like, well, that bit broke, so what do I do? And by beginning to actually construct those kinds of things, those repair manuals, you understand more thoroughly what it is that you're building. Quickstart guides, big fan of those because that's a very concise way, because Quickstart guides are meant to be quick and short, in which you can describe what it is that you're trying to build or create. And product catalogs, big fan of product catalogs, because those are one of the ways in which things almost become like, oh, if it's in a catalog, it must really exist. And you're forced to answer a whole bunch of questions that you might not otherwise even address or even consider. How much does it cost? Where is it manufactured? Is it manufactured in a bunch of different places? How do you describe it? What kind of currency do you accept? Do you accept Bitcoin? And why do you accept Bitcoin? What does it look like? In a product catalog kind of way, not just like a napkin sketch. So actually being thorough about the problem and making it bigger. And it's not so much the conclusion of the work that is interesting, although I think making it really compelling and kind of cool and maybe even a little bit confusing to people because they're like, wait, is this real? That's really exciting stuff. But it forces you to do things that you would have to do anyway. So if someone said like, what colors does it come in? As an engineer, might say like, color doesn't matter, whatever people like. But if someone says, you got to answer that question, you begin to consider like, well, what color would it be and why would it be those colors? And you begin to understand what it is that you're creating in a much more thorough way. So here's an example of one of my favorite design fiction moments. So we might say this was a design fiction for augmented reality. So absolutely, a super important film, very important to watch. They Live, John Carpenter, 1998. So Rowdy Roddy Piper, famous action hero, gets these glasses, and they show the world in a different way when he puts them on. No. What's that? And so this is, before, I guess maybe in and around early kind of almost like more science fictional than science fact representations of augmented reality, but a remarkable way in which this very simple idea that there could be this alternate world and we're just not seeing it, but if we had some kind of affordance that allowed us to see it, what would that world look like is an abstract question. I'm even having trouble saying it. But if you begin to show it, it's like, well, let me just show you what I mean in some kind of way. You begin to understand what the possible implications were. Of course, this is just a crazy zombie attack film, but it has these. It sort of thickens the problem space. So it's not just about wayfinding, and it's not just about all the other things that Google Glass may have been if it wasn't just sort of like a not thoroughly considered idea. But it begins to tell a story about a world in which this actually exists. And someone might say, someone clever at Google might say like, oh, brilliant, we can have like multiple forms of advertising because this thing's gonna be able to show things because it's gonna be able to do kind of scene recognition. That's a great idea. Thanks for making this film. You gave me a new idea. Or it might be someone saying like, actually, this might be a little bit squirrely because other people seeing other things that other people next to them aren't seeing might have implications for pedestrian foot traffic. People might get distracted by something that they're not that someone else isn't seeing. So all these kinds of things begin to bubble out. And by forcing yourself to kind of go through it, not just imagining that or describing it to a friend, but saying like, right, who's got a camera? We're going to take 2 hours, make a quick film. I'm going to get in After Effects, do a quick edit, and by 6 o'clock tonight, we'll have something we can share and talk about. Is a powerful way of developing and evolving your ideas. Another super important film. Everyone must have seen this, I hope. 2001: A Space Odyssey. 1968, Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke telling a story about interplanetary space travel before we even got to the moon. So they're doing this at the same time that space programs in the US and the Soviet Union are in full swing, which must have been an absolutely remarkable time to actually make a film about space travel. And it was so remarkable that Stanley Kubrick, being Stanley Kubrick and the kind of character that he is, decided to hire actual rocket scientists away from space programs to help him with the production design. So the spacesuits that you see in 2001: A Space Odyssey, some of the materials that they try to represent in the structures of the spacecraft came from actual rocket scientists. So it wasn't just an artist saying like, well, I think it should look something like this. It was actual rocket scientists who were designing spacesuits saying, actually, this is sort of what it looks like, and here are the reasons why. And when I say Stanley Kubrick being Stanley Kubrick, I mean a guy who's like, his representations of worlds, he's not just like, he's the kind of guy, he wouldn't say like, good enough, that's good enough. That's not good enough. It's got to be thorough. I have to feel like this is representing a possible world. And even down to the details that you see here, at that point, you would take for granted that IBM would be involved. So there's an IBM logo in there. He's got graphical user interfaces before there was even that expression, graphical user interface. So representing these things in ways that, if anyone's seen like Mission Control from back in the day, it was mostly text stuff and people doing ASCII art effectively to try to represent graphs and those sorts of things. He just goes a step further. And that's him collaborating with amazing production designers to create these things. And it's not easy stuff. So there was no CGI. They actually had to make the film that represented these screens and then rear project them to show them. And all the things that he does, just the level of detail in this stuff is mind-boggling. And in my mind, this is sort of this is a prototype of graphical user interface. Not just because he's showing it, but he's showing humans involved in it. And so the procedure, some people might say it was sort of a laborious scene of just trying to docking a ship to the space station. It goes on for about 20 minutes. But he shows it, he's thorough about it. He shows all the complexities that might be involved in it, how the displays interact with the relative motion of the different objects and all that kind of stuff. It's an amazing visual scene. So this was one of the original movie posters from 2001: A Space Odyssey. So we see like activity, something going on the moon, a couple astronauts, they're sort of doing, looks like scientific sort of stuff. They're studying things, reviewing notes, but they have that thing there. some kind of tablet-y, iPad-y looking thing. Remember, this is 1968, so it might not be hard to speculate that people would represent information on something other than a piece of paper and a clipboard if they're in outer space. It might be something sort of techy, and it's probably a screen of some sort. So, the remarkable imagination, again, sort of represented here. And here are the two astronauts in zero-G eating horrible-looking food. Also looking at these kind of iPad-y looking things, kind of cool. Again, just that ability to kind of sit down with a bunch of production designers and a good creative team and sort of technicians and that kind of stuff. Like, how would we see things in the future? And say, like, well, it'd probably be like this television thing that we have now, only much more compact and sort of portable and that kind of stuff. That's how hard you can extrapolate things along those kind of usual instrumental dimensions. Smaller, lighter, cheaper, faster, blah, 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 blah. But then this happens, which blew my mind. So when Samsung and Apple went to court, Samsung cited 2001 Space Odyssey in legal terms as precedents for dismissing the case that Apple was the innovator of this kind of iPad-y thing. They literally pointed to that YouTube video that I just showed you in a legal document. So it's not just me up here saying like, oh, like sometimes film sort of like shapes the material world and has implications in things like jurisprudence. That has huge implications on our lives. So if a court makes a decision, it affects us in ways that are very material. It means we pay more money for something, or it means that, if Samsung had won this case, that maybe Apple would have to get into a different line of business. Like, real material change in the world happens because of science fiction film. Yeah? I mean, this is like heavy stuff. Samsung didn't win because Apple's got better lawyers or something. So here's a little film that we made, and I'll just let it play and then we can talk about it. It's just a little snip from the film. So what happened there is that it didn't recognize her because she had different makeup on from its imprint of her.
Call Gerardo.
Name unknown.
Call Gerardo.
Name unknown.
Call Gerardo.
Calling Gerardo.
Hello?
Hey, Gerardo. Did you call?
Yeah, are we still on for coffee?
Yeah, I will be there.
I'm running a little late, but we'll be there by noon.
Okay.
Where are you?
Oh.
Call ended.
Failed gesture recognition.
Call Gerardo.
Calling Gerardo.
Hello?
Hey, Gerardo. Sorry, I accidentally hung up.
That's fine. So are we meeting at Howard Park?
Yeah, let's meet in like half an hour.
Okay, be there.
Bye.
Call ended.
So this was a film from a set of work that we did. We called Curious Rituals, and we were just sort of interested in studying the just the kind of everyday experiences we might have in a world in which gesture and voice become a kind of common, everyday, normal human way in which we sort of interact with algorithms out there. And rather than just sort of showing that bright, gleaming, perfect future, we want to just show like what we all know at the end of the day, despite the brilliance of our ideas, despite the remarkable skills of the builders of algorithms, shit doesn't work. It just goes south. And to varying levels of degrees, I'm very sensitive to this, maybe because I'm an engineer. You realize that you can't solve all the problems, nor would you necessarily be expected to. And I think it's that expectation that kind of throws things off a little bit. This work is not meant to say we shouldn't do this stuff or we shouldn't pursue it. It's meant, again, to sort of broaden out your understanding of the implications of the work so that you can make the work better. And it doesn't mean that you have to like, okay, so Gerardo, I should build in a better recognition for names that are not US English. Maybe it does. But it also represents this idea that almost bringing a little bit of humility to the work that we do rather than hubris. Like, we have this remarkable expectation to create a much better world, but we're just humans ourselves. And so the implications of our work aren't always going to be absolutely perfect. And so doing this work, it's almost like a conversation starter to, again, sort of like broaden out the definition of the problem that we're trying to solve. And just go through the work of saying, like, again, inserting a bit of humility into your understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, to say, rather than just trying to solve this problem, I'm going to tell a little story about a world in which this, my ideal solution exists. And just do that really, really quickly. Like, don't be overly precious about it, but also be like, come on, I know that when I reach for the alarm clock, I don't always hit it. I sometimes knock it off the table. So what is that same kind of gesture? How does that operate in a world in which maybe you just tell the alarm to turn off? You say, what's she called? Alexa? Say, Alexa, stop the alarm. And Alexa either misunderstands you or the Wi-Fi's gone down, so Alexa just sits there spinning and the alarm's still going off. And just sort of running those stories through. Plus, it can be fun and funny, I think. Repair manuals is another favorite idiom. Anyone know what this is? You win. Actually, you do win. You got a TBD catalog.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Star Trek Communicator. This was from I think it was Sotheby's auction catalog, so it was an actual prop that was used. It's just a prop, so someone crafted it, made it into a thing. They used some materials that they found around. They probably talked about kind of what it should be like, sort of walkie-talkie-like, that sort of thing. So this is a Star Trek Starfleet technical manual. Remember, I got one of these when I was about 11 years old, maybe? It's like I wanted it so badly. My dad made me wait until there was a Star Trek convention because he was like, we just knew it would be cheaper there than it would be at the local bookstore. And so I waited and I got it. Some guy called Franz Joseph. At the time, when, like 11-year-old, I was just like, this is just a technical manual for this show that I'm really into, and it's going to show me the technical details of the show, like how this stuff works. Super naive. But it sort of did. Like, it had this level of detail and levels like veracity that was really compelling. Like, this isn't just like a, production still of William Shatner with a communicator. This is like technical stuff. Like, I can tell by, it's got a plan view. It's got sort of like call outs in a particular style that represents, instrumental utility, like telling you what parts are and that kind of thing. Scale, showing you what colors things go. Oh, what the heck? A schematic? Are you kidding me? Like, with me, like at that time, I was like, I was starting to build circuits. I was like, there it is, done deal. I can build one. And it, absolutely looks right. Look, it's got crystals for each one of the channels. Remember those? They were like, you use crystals. It's got 3 transistors, a bunch of switches, a battery. Of course, it makes absolutely perfectly good sense. Look, it's even got a parts list. Amazing. So this was a book that this guy, like I said, Franz Joseph wrote. So it was a New York Times bestseller, which is amazing. Franz Joseph was an aerospace draftsman in Southern California. So he had that kind of technical, mechanical skill to kind of draw these things. He was also obviously a fan of Star Trek, and he just took upon himself, independent of, of CBS and the whole Star Trek universe, to just basically make this. So he just sat down. I imagine him in his evenings with his drafts table, with a glass of port next to him, and just kind of like, music playing, and he's just sort of drawing these things. What would this actually look like? And it became, it was the kind of thing that was, sort of circulated amongst the Star Trek fan universe at trade shows and conventions. And it's something that in the world today we take for granted that entertainment enterprises would kind of know, but CBS didn't know that this was going on until it kind of bubbled up, and they're just like, wait, what the heck? And at that point they had canceled the show, but once they realized that there was this whole kind of like, subculture, as they would have called it back then, of people who were actually engaged in expanding the fiction of the universe that they created, they actually rebuilt, they brought the franchise back, which is absolutely remarkable. You know what this is, right? No one gets a prize for that one. Look at that. The Haynes people made a repair manual for the Millennium Falcon. How cool is that? So the Haynes Manual, if you don't know, they're just remarkable franchise of workshop manuals. So this is the one I had for my VW Rabbit because I bought it for $500 and spent all my money, and only way I could get it fixed was to fix it myself. So it just tells you how to repair, all the repair procedures for the fuel injectors and suspension and everything else you might need to deal with. So they very cleverly, I'm not sure who did, I should find out, decided that they would just create these repair manuals for these fictional things. So like the Enterprise, like, oh yeah, I got an old Enterprise D in the back lot, and it's kind of gotten problems with the thrust injector. How can I fix it? And they actually go through, they talk about the different systems. They kind of like, depending on which one, they kind of vary between kind of like describing a bit more the kind of the fictional universe. So they'll talk about, different characters and their kind of role that they play. And sometimes they'll actually delve into things like, people like scientists and other people sort of speculating about the possibilities of warp travel, whatever that might be, really digging into like the science behind it, or just like fun stuff like actually, little schematics and blueprints about the ships and what they look like. And it's just a way to kind of like expand and invest your imagination into it. This is one of my, so Apollo 11, that actually exists, but I love that, I can have like an owner workshop manual for what I think is one of the most amazing vehicles ever built. Quickstart guides is another area. So at one point we were doing a catalog project, and it was around the car. We called the car Algor, and it was Google's self-driving car of some sort. And we had a description of it and that kind of thing. And then we thought like, well, that didn't feel like quite enough. What if we just did a workshop and we made a Quickstart guide for the self-driving car? I just thought that was absolutely exciting, because it's like, yeah, we like the idea of like the self-driving car, like in principle, in general, and we think about the ways in which it might help our lives and all those kinds of things, and be fantastic on long road trips and all that stuff. But what's it going to mean for people when they actually get it? Like, what's the first thing? What are the things that the questions they're going to ask, or the problems that they might have that you need to be able to describe in a very, very concise way? And doing it in a concise way, it forces you to compact the problem down to just the key elements, so you can't get abstract. It's a job for people to do, and people who do Quickstart guides really, really well are worth their weight in gold, because they're able to take a complex system, like any point and shoot camera is barely point and shoot. I mean, it's got like menu systems that are absolutely baroque. They're just like all kinds of crazy stuff going on. Like, I just want to take a photo. First of all, which one's the power button? So just being able to condense problems down to like just that tangible moment in which you first have it and need to operate it. And so just briefly I described, so to do this project, first thing we did is we did, working with some students at CCA, we did almost the world in which this exists, represented in sort of popular media. So we did, imagining moments in which the car exists, like all kinds of things happen in and around it. So someone does a study on the rise of the well-rested commuter. So like all of a sudden, people's behaviors at work change because actually they get another 30-minute snooze on their way to work. How does that change and inform and shape what it is to be like, in an office where most people come in and maybe they're like a little bit agitated because that one guy cut them off and all those kinds of things. All of a sudden, people are happy. Homeless but not carless. So people decide like, actually, if I put my self-driving car in infinite loop mode, I can live in it. I'll just do laps around San Francisco. It's much cheaper than rent. And so this becomes another one of those implications. And you don't have to like solve that problem, or you just say it in a headline, and it gets people thinking about like, oh yeah, that could be one of the things that happen. I could totally imagine that. All of a sudden, people find a way to hack self-driving cars to do ramrod jobs on jewelers and all that kind of stuff. So people just sort of like say like, oh, just drive that way as fast as possible because they hacked it. And now there's just this raft of like burglaries of cars ramming into jewelry shops and people just running in and heisting them. This stuff will happen. We know that. Despite the fact that people are like, it seems a little far-fetched. Justin Bieber, drunk, falls asleep in the back of his car. Can't lose his GPS signal and just does laps around Calabasas, California with him in it. TMZ, on the spot. Amazon now becomes the third biggest auto manufacturer. Like, sure, I mean, I could see it. They're getting into everything. So this is how you start. So we started, again, with this, the importance of having the tangible result, the thing at the end of it, is super important. So you don't just want to walk out of the room with, forgive me, but like a stack of Post-it notes that you then lose later. You don't want to just like walk out of the room with, oh, that was an interesting conversation, but now I've got other things I got to deal with. You want to walk out with something that becomes like a memento of the experience that you still refer back to. Something tangible that sits on your desk, not on a hard drive, that you can then say like, yeah, that was actually, there was a couple things in there I still want to get back to. I still want to evolve and develop. So we always, always, always put, the final punctuation is, here's the film. It might be 3 minutes. Here's the printed out Quickstart guide. It might be 7 pages. Here is the, the kind of MacGuffin-y kind of object that we made because we did a bunch of CAD and printed something out in 3D, and that's going to remind us of what we talked about. So, you guys know what workshops look like, people sitting around, sketching ideas out. There's me sitting in a corner. I got to work on the frequently asked questions, which was super, super fun. And the overall sort of definition of the problem was in the beginning, we spent the first about 90 minutes saying what sections, what are the main systems that we need to address, what are the kinds of other aspects in and around the world of self-driving cars that we might need to explain to people, aside from just like, get from point A to point B. So here's some of the sections. So legal claims and priorities, the AI system, ingress and egress, how do you get in and out? How do you program a route? How do you do manual override? This thing is screwed up. It's following Waze. I know that left turn is no good. There's a construction going on down there. And then the AV entertainment, because like, look, if we're gonna be in self-driving cars, like, yes, sure, so we might say like, oh, I'll get much more reading done. But when it comes down to it, people will be like, oh, Cars 4, I wanna see that. So how do you interact with those sort of systems? Like real world stuff. People divided up into groups. And then, you again, starting to make it tangible to show what would it look like? What are the different, how do we want to represent these different systems? How do we want to describe them? What's the the on-brand vernacular? What's the kind of language that we want to use that expresses these ideas in a human way? And that's I've been involved in a company that now is where the ways in which we communicate what we're doing is super important, obviously, but we want to do it in a particular way. That forces you to understand and come to terms with what is the, who are you communicating to and how do you want to communicate to them? What are the keywords that you want to use? And it almost makes it feel more real. And so then, we said this is what we ended up with. So we defined a visual style. This is the kind. So we did this workshop ran. We had the rough thing, and then 4 of us sat down over about 90 minutes and just kind of quickly pulled this together, like very simple visual style. But again, trying to make it feel like and look like it's a real thing. Like this is the Quickstart guide for Amazon's self-driving car. It's not an idea for a Quickstart guide for a self-driving car. You can print it out and kind of like bind it and sort of say like, here, this is what it would look like. So just go through a few pages. So like parking your car, like is there a valet mode? So you actually put it in valet mode, the car stops, you get out, and then it goes someplace. So just having that idea that this is what you would do, rather than just saying like, yeah, probably it parks itself. You actually have to show it and describe it and show people how to operate it, what button they need to press, how much time they have to get out of the car, all those kinds of things. And you start understanding the problem in a much more rich way. How do you call the car back? So if the car's gone in valet mode, if you're in Los Angeles, who knows where it might go? You might be trying to park like in Santa Monica, and it might be like, I got to go to Hollywood in order to stop moving because of some kind of weird regulation in Santa Monica. So it's going to say like, how long is it going to take for you to get your car back? When should you actually call it back? Errand mode. So this is like my favorite. So like, God, I want some pizza, but I don't want to get in the car. I'm already in my pajamas and my house slippers. Like, send the car to Pizza Hut. So that's cool. But then like, wait a minute. So if the car goes to Pizza Hut, where are they going to put the pizza? Like, I don't want to put it inside. First of all, I don't want them getting in my car because maybe I've left something valuable in there that I'm just fine leaving there, but I don't want to just them get in there. And then plus, the car is going to smell like pizza. So it's like, oh, so these cars actually need like a valet food or item trunk that someone can open up with a special unlock code. Okay, brilliant, cool. So they've got that. So that's something else. Got to tell the industrial designers that they're going to need to build that kind of system. But then if it's food, like, how do they keep the pizza warm? And how do they keep the milkshake that come with the pizza from melting? Uh-oh. So now it's got to have a cold and a hot one. And so, you start running all these problems through to a point where you're actually doing the work of designing the product rather than just saying like, yeah, I can go get errands. Refresh. So if you loan your car out, because it's like also got, you have a contract with Uber that 40% of the time Uber can take over your car. So some people might get into it and it might be out during after hours and someone might get sick in the car or someone just might, leave a bad smell in it. So it needs a system to be able to refresh itself after each drive. And so you got to run through like, how do you do it? So if it's going to like inject some kind of like freshener into the car, it needs to give you a warning because you don't want to get like covered in this kind of refreshener. So running through all those kinds of implications, again, sort of enlivens the problem. And then, so like some of the frequently asked questions, there's a whole fun list of them. So things like, can I jailbreak my car? And so you got to give like a long explanation about, why you can't do that and what the possible legal implications could be. Can I service my car myself? Like, heck no. I do that, which is sort of interesting. I've left someone or something in my car when I've sent it off in Uber mode. How do I get them back? My kid in the car or my groceries because I was confused and all of a sudden it just went off. Like, what the? And so product catalogs. How much? Okay, I'll just go quickly. So super fan of catalogs again because they're a way in which you can represent sort of you get a sense of a world in which represented, particularly a kind of consumer world by the things that are out there. So even just going through Amazon, you get a sense of like, okay, so what it's almost like the inverse of someone telling you the story about the world. It's like, let me just see the kind of stuff that people buy. And I'll get a better sense of the kind of world that it is. And we go sort of a step further because we want to try to translate like big abstract ideas and make them normal, ordinary, and everyday by abstracting them down to the point where they're really commoditized. So artificial intelligences come in 74 cultures and comes in red, green, and blue. What is that world? So not making it a kind of thing where it's just the provenance of a few people who have access to it, but where literally I can get an artificial intelligence for 99 cents and it lasts for 7 days. What does that world look like when everyone has access to these grand ideas? And so we focus a lot on, the corner convenience store. So when we did the TBD catalog, I'll give away a few more, got a group of us together, so science fiction writers, artists, curators, designers, engineers, computer scientists, filmmakers, and we basically sat in a room for a couple of days. We had a little bit of stimulus material, and this is sort of like, maybe one of the larger design fiction projects because it went over 3 days rather than, 3 hours. Getting people to think about combinations of things and what they might look like. So we use this kind of deck of cards to say, mix a wallet with artificial intelligence plus miniaturization. Like what are the implications of that? Taking broad themes and trying to extrapolate them, away from, again, the abstract to like, what does it mean for the normal person who's just, trying to get a breakfast sandwich? Again, workshop stuff, people standing around looking at things, drawing pictures. We did it in Detroit, which is an amazing city, just because it exudes possibility. It was a perfect place to do this. And we were fortunate enough to spend a couple of days at the Henry Ford Museum and actually go into the super secret dark archives where they've got everything. They've got every McDonald's land toy. Remember McDonald's used to give away toys? Like they've got like drawers and drawers of them. They have Judy Garland's shoes from Wizard of Oz. They've got Nikolai Tesla. There's a whole barn filled with like a bunch of his stuff, which is amazing. So it's just a sort of like stimulus, like seeing the world of material objects as stimulus. And then we just, we basically constructed sort of like we, again, having that one have that tangible end, like groups of 2 or 3 of us would just have one particular product to focus on. And had to do everything. So again, just overemphasizing the point that actually being thorough about it, not just having the name or what it would do, but saying you gotta have a good commercial name, something you think is going to sell. You have to describe it. You have to give it a price. You have to have any kind of like particular export restrictions that might apply. You might need to normalize it into different currencies. It might have different prices based on what part of the world it was made at. You take all the themes that people think about today, like how much of it is a crowd-funded idea. So someone's saying, this is the product. If you pay for it now, you'll get it in 6 months. Or if you pay for it now, as we know, I mean, now I mean, I buy my clothes from a place that's like, if we get enough money, we'll actually make your shirt, which is, which is fantastic, but also, otherworldly. But, playing those kinds of themes out and evolving them. And so here's some of the things. So the child followed flying AV. So this is a time when drones were still like, wow, super cool. Now they're kind of like, everyone's got them. But like, there would be a drone that like follows your kid and maybe even like kind of punishes it if it's kind of sulking. A drone that would walk your dog. Like these were things at the time where it's just, now I'm looking at it, it's like, it was only a few years ago where it's kind of like, yeah, it probably exists. And we actually had people saying like, hey, but do you guys know that already exists? So your catalog's bullshit. It's like, that's not the point. We're not trying to predict things. We're trying to just sort of represent the completeness of a world in which all these things that we're excited about now were in a SkyMall catalog, or were the kinds of things that people order 3 of because I might break one or lose one. Oh yeah, like Bitcoin mining was huge. So people just selling just like, chips that just do that, but routinely. It's not a big extra thing. Yeah, so there's a dog walker drone. Implications for like, just even putting in that something is made in Costa Rica, people be like, huh? Like that's not a source of major manufacturing, particularly of consumer electronics, but like in a world in which it was, that gets people thinking about how manufacturing is constantly evolving and shifting. Yeah, Fitbits were huge, so this thing would actually shake your Fitbit because somehow Fitbits were attached to the price of your health insurance, so it was a little bit of a kind of dodgy situation. No one wants smartphones anymore, they just want phones that are slightly clever. And so we're trying to understand, because smart is like a bit of vernacular, we assume what it means, but like suppose that evolved and shifted and someone came up with, as they might, they say like, actually clever is the new thing. Clever is sort of like, it's like the thing knows what to do, but it's maybe a little bit of a smart ass about it. Which, you can imagine artificial intelligence is coming to that point where it's not just, if you think, Siri or Alexa are pleasant, it has a little bit of attitude, like that. Panda jerky, so there's people like, panda jerky, what are you talking about? We imagine a world in which actually what happened is they managed genetically to get pandas to reproduce. Brilliant. But then they overproduced. And now they're feral. And they're all over the place. They're like, like bears in Jackson, Wyoming, basically walking up to your house, opening the door, coming in and stealing your food. So people are like, shit, what are we gonna do now? And so like, I know what we'll do. We'll cull them and we'll jerk their meat and we'll sell it. Do you think that'll work? People are like, brilliant. I know it's horrible. Everyone wants big data. So now there are little service companies that go around like enlarging data for you. No data type is too small. Completely algorithmically generated films. So you basically say, I want a little bit of action. There should be a bank robbery, a car chase, and about 10% romance. Blink. Oh, there's my film. Fantastic. And part of that was just, films can be formulaic, and you kind of like, I could have done that. I know the plot structure, and it's just basically. Air freshener was my favorite, like a world in which, because kids are, coming up, doing a lot of interaction with visual screens, that actually a kind of aphasia evolves and develops where they have trouble processing speech because they don't have that kind of interaction that you normally have with like one-on-one dialogue. And so this is just sort of an evolving kind of behavioral trait. And so you have to have these kind of ear freshener devices that I don't know what they do, but it's more the idea that there would be this aphasia. Poor kid. And so this was, this was the work. So just to kind of take those ideas and then just do the work of like kind of representing what that might look like as a very complete kind of product catalog, set of implications, notes, and as another, again, one of these archetypes. Yep, make it into a thing, put it on the internet, and sell them. Did the same thing with IKEA. And that's it. Thank you.
Time for a few questions.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation. Really exciting work. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you see the design space of critical design or design futures, and kind of, I mean, I sort of see, you know, on one end, the positivism of things like Apple's Knowledge Navigator, things that come from companies where they're trying to create this vision of what the future could be, and maybe on the other end, a dystopian future like in Black Mirror or other things.
Yeah.
But it seems like in your own work, the role of satirism and maybe even camp comes into play. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you see inside of this space of design fiction and what you think, you know, is there something that you think is more effective at actually getting points across, or is it important to have these different perspectives?
Well, I think it's definitely important to have different perspectives. So, you know, given that's assumed. I think for my own practice, and I think other, you know, within the Near Future Laboratory, I find humor at some level incredibly effective, and largely because it's if you can have that break from like like intellectual pragmatism to just say like, oh, it's a good one. It's good, and it's a cognitive thing that allows you, again, I think, to enter that realm of like, okay, I'm going to accept this challenge, and I'm going to engage in this because actually those guys look like they're having fun. I want to be over there doing what they're doing, as opposed to anything that where it almost seems like a burden to address the problem, and the problem might be something of such ponderous weight that you can't even get your head around it because you're like, I can't fix that. And that's another reason to focus on the normal, ordinary, everyday. It's like you just get down to that thing where it's like, I understand that. I understand that constrained problem space for climate collapse, environmental degradation. I can understand what that means. And it's like for what my commute might look like in the morning, so I can begin to show that and represent that. And even you try to find the way to do it so that it does feel like there's a point of entry for people to kind of just come in and even if it's like gallows humor, find the way to say like, okay, so now we can talk about it. Now we're all like, it's easier. And I'm personally naturally drawn to that, I think.
I have a question about cyclicality. So, like, in a lot of industries, say if you take retail, for example, you see innovation go through these like cycles. So, for example, with phones, we started off with really large phones, and then we got to like the super small ones, and now we're like increasing screen size again. And so, as you were imagining the future, how did you factor the past into that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure the exact answer, but there was one project that we did where we actually it had two main chapters. One was the past, and so we took as our kind of defining problem like take the innovations that we take for granted today and treat them as if they belonged in a museum of the most amazing things ever. And so, and we started again at the 99-cent store, so like the corner bodega or the corner convenience store, and you said fire, like the fact that you can go and you can get a lighter in 20 different colors. There was a time when people would have been like, what? Like I can have portable fire? I don't need to like strike a stone, or like cowboys out in the West. It's like they have to like go get kindling and try to get something. Maps, which we take for granted. But like you were talking about, like if there was a time when like maps were only the provenance of like sea captains and like kings. Everyone else was kind of like you have to ask directions and those kinds of things. And so I think almost like translating something that you expect to exist or you think or maybe possibly or you want to show what it would be like in the future, but then kind of like normalizing it is one way. So I think, you know, the cyclicality thing, I don't know, you know, it's a, so I, you know, it's a complete digression, but so I had started a company that's making a bicycle computer. So this is a bicycle computer, it really is. It's got GPS and all those kinds of things, but it has an analog display, a mechanical display. And this for us wasn't because we wanted to be retro, and it wasn't because we wanted to pull something from the past. It's just like a better way of seeing information when you're doing something mechanical anyway. It's not just like a data display. It's like, you know, you pedal harder and something moves, which is much more pleasing than anything else. So I think thinking about ways in which things that existed in the past were not, they didn't exist there because no one knew any better. They existed there for like a reason and a purpose. And so to take your example about, you know, the size of phones or screens or that kind of thing is almost, you know, related. So like understanding that trajectories, you know, things are a pendulum, right? So they go one way and they come back another way, and like life and politics and society and technology and those kinds of things. And so imagining that the thing that someone might say is highly unlikely, like we'll never go back to analog mechanical displays. The mechanical watch industry is going gangbusters. I mean, they're like, you know, just I'm a bit of a watch aficionado, and there are people making watches that anyone else would say like, that will not exist in the future because everything will be on a digital display. And Apple's coming out with an iWatch anyway, and they're gonna rule the world, which doesn't happen. And so you find those ways in which you take something that existed in the past, bring it back into your representation of a design fiction, and get people to talk about it and ask a question and respond to it, and have those examples of the ways in which understanding that the future isn't just up and to the right. Things just don't go that way all the time. They just kind of, like you're saying, have these evolutions and these revolutions.
All right, let's thank our speaker.